Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hiya. Hi, guys. How you doing?
I am not feeling brilliant, I have to say. I don't know what's wrong with me. I had an anchovies and pasta the other day, and ever since then, I don't know what's going on. But it was delicious. I will maybe we should link to the recipe, and you can all feel like this next week. Welcome to the mess we're in, the show that explores gender ideology despite everyone wanting us to shut up. How has everyone's week been?
Yeah, all right. I'm still laughing at that Sarah Silverman
Right.
clip. Did you see that?
You know, I can never watch things like that because they're just so depressing. You know, I can't get through a second of them without wanting to scream.
I tell you, it was quite an extraordinary clip. It was only about sort of 20 seconds long, but there was so much wrong with it, layer upon layer.
Yeah.
Of sort of things wrong with it, from the very rueful shaking of the head, like the over dramatizing of it, as much presumably to have to convince herself as to convince the audience, because what she was saying was so ridiculous. And it was about sports. It was about Caitlyn Jenner. Having come out and said that actually trans girls shouldn't play girl sports. And I mean, not least of all, what was wrong with it is that she called Caitlyn Jenner a twat, but pronounced it twat. Why? We were like, what the fuck?
That's the right way.
No, not in Britain. Not in Britain.
Yeah. Not in Britain. We say twat. We say twat in Britain.
Yeah, it's twat, man. But it was quite extraordinary because she starts sentences and then fails to finish them because there is nothing that she can say. So she says, "What do you think trans girls are too strong?" And the answer is, well, in some cases, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? And then she goes on to say, well, what about tall girls as opposed to short girls?
That's why I
but there's no ending to that sentence. It's just, what about tall girls? But she doesn't say, well, what about tall girls? Where do you think they should compete? Where do you think the cutoff? But then she goes on to say, why couldn't we just have height categories or weight categories? And again, she's not saying, look, this is how I think we should do it. This is my proposal. We should have these weight categories, and these are the consequences, and this is how it should be worked. But she doesn't. She just throws it out there. What about? I mean, who's she asking? Jenner? Us?
I know
it's so wrong. But more than that, even if you do, and stop me if you want me to stop ranting, but there's so much wrong with this. But when you know, I was thinking about the unintended consequences, say maybe of saying, okay, let's have weight and height categories instead of the very obvious sex categories. What are the unintended consequences of this? Well, presumably at some point you'd have to say, we're going to have to weigh and measure all the kids in school at periodic intervals. And so, you know, there's obviously not going to be anything wrong with publicly weighing teenage girls and then saying, no, actually, you're too heavy. You have to go into the heavy girls category.
But
that's not going to cause any fucking problems, is it?
I know, but I think you're almost traveling too far down that road, Helen, because like the thing is, we know this well, that when you replace sex as a what would you call it, as a standard for, I don't know, deciding which people you have to exclude from certain spaces and so on, when you make that more complicated, everything is just completely confusing. You know, there's no, and it's deliberately that way because the people who are in control of the conversation get to call other people bigots and so on when they transgress. And that's because the conversation is so unbelievably confusing and deliberately kept confusing that people can't talk about it without transgressing, even by accident. So I feel like you know, we shouldn't even we shouldn't even go there.
No, obviously that's not going to happen. But even as you say, but even as a thought experiment, let's take it a little further and realize the terrible consequences of this. That teenage girls are going to be publicly weighed at a periodic interval, and say small boys who have later hit puberty, they're going to be like, well, you actually have to play with the majority of girls' team. Because the categories will pretty much sort itself out on sex anyway, like at the extreme ends, and you'll have a few in the middle moving. So you'll have the boys who haven't hit puberty playing with the girls, and girls who've put on a bit of weight because they've hit puberty earlier and now have grown boobs have got to go and play with the boys. It's just the most ridiculous idea, and it isn't even thought out and explained so that it can be defended. It's just thrown out there as a ridiculous, oh my god, isn't this terrible? And then she calls Jenner a twat because twat.
I just don't I just find it so exasperating and so continually confusing how these, I know one thing that happened with Sarah Silverman, right, is I think she's playing a little bit of a kind of a defense through attack game, because Sarah Silverman is eminently cancelable. She's done blackface, she's done all sorts of jokes, any one of which could be dug up if she transgresses in another area and used against her. So I think that she's kind of rebuilding herself as this kind of woke Virgin Mary type of figure, and it's not so much dishonest as
incredibly dishonest.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's deliberately dishonest or just accidentally dishonest. I think, like a lot of people in this, she has she's outsourced her conscience
she's outsourced her critical thinking.
Yeah,
her brother's transgender, right? Or sorry, her brother is male to female, right?
Male to female, right? Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That explains everything then, didn't it?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a homosexual, transsexual, or a hipster transsexual or something. But I'm not sure anything, but I heard that. But I mean, if we try to sort sports based on these other criteria, your weight or your height, notwithstanding the fact that those aren't necessarily the things that make you excel in an individual sport, there's like pelvic shape and muscle mass and everything else. The first people who will be unhappy will be the trans people. Because, of course, trans people aren't looking for fairness in sport. They're looking for validation to be on a girl's team. The first people to tell you that they don't ever want to see men's and women's teams taken away are trans women. They want women's teams so they can have something to, dance around and then be, look at me, I'm a girl.
Absolutely.
Yeah, same reason that they hate third spaces as a solution to the bathroom problem.
Yeah, you can have the most golden third space for trans women. Like the magical Monty Burns secret bathroom, and fountains and everything's beautiful, and it's just like all marble. Doesn't matter. They'd be like, but it's not a women's space.
No, absolutely. Plus, because saying I'm trans isn't actually magic, the fact that a boy identifies as a girl doesn't mean that he won't still be as tall and as heavy and will still be in the boys team or the predominantly boys team. It's the prepubescent boys that won't be. Those poor buggers who, like, you go to Thorpe Park and want to really go on the roller coaster, but you can't because you haven't quite got tall enough, and you have to stand under the little thing and be embarrassed and humiliated. And so it'll just humiliate boys who have hit puberty late, and a lot of the trans girls would be on the boys team anyway. So the whole thing is completely unthought out. And because it's obviously unthought out, it's obviously there as a show. It's simply there to say, I am woke, and I genuinely, it's not about sports. It's about saying trans girls are girls. And you should just accept this.
And also, another interesting aspect of it, which I always point out to people, I use also the examples of Debbie Hayton and Christina Harrison to point this out, is that this is a purely ideological battle. It's not a moral one. This is basically, there are people who are on the right side and people who are on the wrong side. And Kathleen Jenner is on the wrong side. And they can say that because Kathleen Jenner is saying something they disagree with. So Kathleen Jenner is now, like, you see, calling him a twat and all this sort of stuff. You see that kind of that kind of switch we all saw when it happened to J.K. Rowling, Debbie Hayton gets terrible bullying from so many different sources. And it's, it just shows that this whole thing of listen to trans people, you hear that a lot. Listen to trans people, well, I do. I listen to Debbie Hayton. I listen to Christine. No, not like that. Not those trans people.
No, don't listen to a trans woman who is actually a trans woman and has been an Olympic athlete on trans women in women's sports. No, absolutely not. They're not qualified.
I know. It's insane. It's just so weird, So it's always, what it comes down to is that, people really must always, bear this in mind. It is an ideological battle. That is what it is, But yeah, so there was that. Well, there was something else really stupid that someone said this. Oh, by the way, our guest today, just to explain, is someone who's not stupid, very much not stupid. This is a terrible introduction. Is very much not stupid. Brilliant. He's Andy Lewis, who is the inventor of the Quackometer, ex-nuclear physicist, I believe, and someone who we're hoping to talk to about the ideological capture of the UK Skeptics movement, because they were captured along with everyone else, and we're going to be asking Andy why. So that's who Andy Lewis is. But yeah, there was
stupid.
No, Andy, not stupid Lewis. But there was something else really dumb that someone said this week.
Well, what do you think of that? There was the whole the Queen being colluding into banning conversion therapy. I think I saw that.
Yes, but that's good. That's good that the way that happened, isn't it? I mean, we're having a consultation, which Stonewall, of course, are very annoyed about, because the consultation is going to be, Stonewall won't like that, because detransitioners and gender critical feminists will have something to say, and parents.
Oh, I wasn't aware. I thought they roped the Queen in to say, no, you can't give these kids therapy. Coupled with the whole Keira Bell thing means that you've got kids who identify as trans. They're seemingly, if this goes through, not going to get any sort of help at all, because they can't get therapy that will talk about what the reasons behind it, and they won't be able to get the affirmation they want with drugs. So what's the point? I thought that the whole point was to sort of genuinely care about trans children, but I'm not sure that it is.
Well, I don't know. I just thought the only thing I heard was the consultation thing, and that Stonewall were annoyed about it. And when Stonewall are annoyed about something, it usually means that thing is good. So I'm glad that they're going to be speaking to people, because the real people who need to be spoken to in this, you could almost say they're trans people. They're still trans people in the sense that they have done some transitioning, are detransitioners. Detransitioners are the voices who are those whose voices we really need to listen to now. And if there is a consultation that takes them into account, I think that'll be brilliant.
Yes, that's true.
Did anyone see Helen Lewis throwing me under the bus this week?
I stopped at that sentence. I was like, ooh, Helen Lewis, I'll read this. And I said something like, showed images of trans people. And I was like, bye, Link. Close down.
I have to say, I mean, I'm getting used to it by now, of people who are supposedly on our side throwing me under the bus. But Helen's thing is the most malevolent I've seen, because she knows that the two links she provided to provide proof of my inadequacies as a human being. One is the Metro, which is a piece we're challenging at the moment. I've got an official complaint in with Ipso challenging it. And the other is, and that's about the Her stunt, which Helen presumably knows was done to bring attention to the cotton ceiling and the coercion of lesbians on supposedly lesbian dating apps. But the other link was saying that I misgender people. And the link they provided was Stephanie Hayden.
This is Stephanie Hayden, the career criminal.
Better be careful. Okay. She's suing. Stephanie is suing me again next month.
Okay. So, you didn't say it. I said it. I'll stop. I only didn't finish the sentence. So.
But let me put it this way: Helen Lewis knows exactly who Stephanie Hayden is, because Helen Lewis is involved in this fight. So for Helen to provide that link is the most callous bit of and cruel bit of positioning I've ever seen. You know, she knows full well what Stephanie Hayden is. And the fact that she told the Atlantic to use that link but didn't give any of the background, I don't know. I mean, what an absolute careerist, you know.
No, it's interesting because I've always quite liked Helen Lewis, although I've really not ever understood the who. Like she'll always say, "But trans women are women," which I don't think you can really.
Oh, Helen says that, does she?
Yeah,
well, then maybe
always
that
has.
is. Helen is someone who she's kind of part of a circle of journalists who are who all wrote me letters saying that I had to stop what I was doing and stuff. And the reason is that, you know, me and the women that I support are actually risking something and won't shut up about this, and it embarrasses them because it's work they should be doing. You know, like there was actually one of their group was a high up member of the UK Skeptics, you know, who was always saying to me, "Oh, we're doing stuff in the background," but never brave enough to actually put her name to it, you know. And this is like the kind of playing both sides thing that I find really, really disgraceful. You know, one of them insulted people who are anonymous on Twitter, you know. And it was like, well, there's very good reason for gender critical women to be anonymous on Twitter. Their jobs, their livelihoods are put at risk every time they.
Well, I think there's room
for nuts.
But there's room for sort of different sort of people in this. I can absolutely see why some women are anonymous. It's excellent when people are not. I've never understood the trans women are women part, but of course I've understood why she's done it, because it means that she can still get published, because otherwise she will just get cancelled, you know. And like Julian spends all of her career basically having to defend that sort of the 501 comment that she made sort of back in the late 1990s. So this is obviously why it's done, is sort of silencing, etc., etc. I thought the Hula Substack article that she wrote was interesting from the fact that it was she writing about it to become part of the story, because the story was about the sort of Substack wars, and without any sort of, and saying, but there's nothing really, it's not about anything but the war. And then she jumps in talking about the war, which just puts herself in the same sort of in the same boat. But
well, her friend
in order to get the attention. But you know, she's written some good stuff.
Her friend James Ball said the exact same thing in an Observer piece about me, you know. And it's like, I think there's a couple of things going on. I think another thing they don't like is the fact that there are journalists on Substack who are writing about the things that they're simply too scared to write about, you know. Like, for instance, like I want to mention this example because I've got a link to share that I want to put in the the links at the end. But you know, Ipso, we've started a petition to try and get Ipso to stop telling journalists to kind of incorrectly sex male criminals in their articles. There's so many articles about men committing very male crimes such as pedophilia and sex offenses, and they're being listed as women in these pieces. And this sounds like a really worthwhile
thing to try and change.
Yeah, I think it might be great. And Ipso, just to say, this is something to bear in mind, Ipso are part of I'm not sure if they've rejoined, but they were part of Stonewall's diversity, whatever club they call that, you know, the diversity racket that Stonewall have going on, you know. So hopefully Ipso have started noticing that Stonewall have a bit of a stink around them and are going to gently pull themselves out of that arrangement, because that'll go a long way. But anyway, it's that type of thing that journalists are colluding in and engaging in. And Helen's career, you know, while a lot of other careers of people, including my own, have stalled as they fight this disgusting encroachment on women, this colonization of women and their spaces, is flourishing, because, you know, and the reason it's flourishing is because she does things like what she did in the Atlantic, which was very dishonestly throw me under the bus, you know.
Yeah,
But
can I just say for a second about that sort of strategy of like, let's keep it all polite and civil and let's never speak out honestly. The gay rights movement did that. So there's a bit of a historical analogy that before Stonewall happened in 1969, the violent riot, for 15, maybe even 20 years, since the 50s, the gay rights movement came together. It wasn't called gay yet, and it wasn't called homosexual because they didn't like the word sexual. They were trying to make it seem clean. You know, this was the 50s, suburban households and all that. So they called themselves homophiles, and they wore business suits. The men and the women wore these polite little dresses, and they had very polite pickets, and they were very clear that it was about love. And it wasn't about gender nonconformity in any way. And they were viciously hostile to any very effeminate gays. And they were viciously hostile to butch lesbians. And they just wanted perfect suburban 1950s, Leave It to Beaver, you know, that kind of look. And they rejected anyone from the movement who deviated from that because they had this mission to demonstrate that they were normal human beings, normal citizens like everyone else. And they had they thought it would just be impossible to ever advance this cause if all these freaks started associating with it, you know? So they had to push them out. And they were vicious about it because they were terrified. They thought the movement will never get ahead. And they were dead fucking wrong because that movement went nowhere for over a decade, possibly 2 decades. No progress. No one paid attention. No one cared. After the Stonewall Riots happened, people said, fuck this. I'm gay. You know, I'm feminine. I'm masculine. I wear what I want. And it's about sex. I don't care what you think. We absolutely sodomize each other, you know? And the honesty, it got lots of headlines. And people can really connect to honesty. People don't connect to that kind of false diplomacy. When you're trying to put on this front, I think when people jar you and say, yeah, look at these images of people claiming to be trans women, that is real and honest. And it doesn't just get headlines and people's attention. It reaches people because it's true. People want to hear the truth. It's refreshing. This is a phenomenon that reaches across everywhere. Like how many right-wing conservatives in the United States were willing to vote for Bernie Sanders just because they liked the appeal of his honesty, you know, that sort of transcended party lines. Maybe that's a weird example, but I'm just trying to show that sort of honesty matters more than this trying to control the narrative sort of strategy. I see people panicking all the time when people on our side are speaking too forthright about gender identity ideology. And I just think they're wrong to panic so much because we saw this in the gay rights movement. It never went anywhere until people started getting bold and honest.
Yeah, well, you know, Helen called me cruel. I phoned her afterwards and I ranted on a message, which hopefully won't turn up in the future. But she actually said, I think, you know, you're cruel and stuff like this. But there, again, it's cruelty to men that she's worried about. She's not worried about the cruelty of men on women's dating apps. She's not worried about the cruelty to lesbians. She's not worried about the cruelty of women who can't put their name to it.
I would ask her this. Has she ever shared an image of a goofy white guy doing something goofy, playing with some goofy armor in his backyard and being embarrassing, or doing anything dorky at all to make fun of him? Then guess what? This is exactly the fucking same thing. You know?
But the thing is, I would argue even that it's kind of not because I wasn't making fun of them. I mean,
but I just mean like these are.
I was saying these are men. These are clearly men, and they're clearly men. It's not so much, you know. One of them had a bit of lipstick on, I think, and a makeup job. You know, the rest of them, again, I keep pointing this out to people, and it's the reason Helen in her Atlantic piece didn't link to the actual piece, because if people saw it, they'd realize the truth of it. It's a very dishonest and unethical thing of her to do. But like the thing is about that piece is that they look like me. They just look like me. They are making no effort. Sorry to describe myself in these terms, but I did put a nice shirt on. But some of these guys didn't even do that. You know, it's just tracksuit tops and the idea that there's some difference between me and these men. It blows my mind.
It's quite interesting because I read just this morning somebody had posted a subreddit thread, a woman. It was just one entry, and it was a woman, and it was on a fashion thread, and all the dots are sort of there in what she's saying, but she hasn't sort of connected them, because she's saying that this is a space for women to share fashion tips, but sometimes you get men who are clearly just cross-dressers come in, and there's some pictures, no, actually there aren't, somebody's linked to similar pictures where the guy is in lots of pink and he's obviously got an erection, and so that's why he's posting, and it's so close. She's saying, women need this space. It's obviously, I can't call them out, because in case I'm wrong and he's actually a trans woman, and trans women should be allowed in here. and it's that really, really, really odd idea. And I think this is the sort of thing you're alluding to, Graham. If you can exhibit exactly the same behavior, exactly the same look, but if you say that you're a trans woman, then you're exempt. But if you don't, then you're just cruel and wrong and invading women's spaces. But the only difference is your own declaration.
It's just mind-boggling.
It's quite insane.
Also, here's a point. Like Helen said that I was making fun of trans people or whatever. I'm sorry, but is there a stable definition of trans that someone has suddenly discovered? Because the last I checked, there is no stable definition of trans. Trans means anything and everything anyone wants it to. So for Helen to suddenly decide that there's a stable difference of trans, I believe another fan of mine, Kathleen Stock, also says something like trans people exist, get over it, in her book. And it's like, wait a sec, what are trans people? What are they? Do you know what I mean? Or do you mean people who've undergone surgery? Do you mean people who've undergone a set of pharmaceutical adjustments to them? Is that what you mean? Or does it include Jeffrey March, who appears only to wear like lipstick and eyeliner and post creepy videos? Is he trans? Is Alok, that nut job, trans? Who is a trans person and who is not? I'd love Helen and Kathleen to answer that question, because as we know, one of the central problems to this ideology is that there is no definition. There is no definition, and the only reason I am not getting away with calling myself non-binary or trans or whatever is because people know I think it's a load of bollocks. But if I kept that more secret than I have, then if I came out now, oh man, I would I wish it's the only way I wish I hadn't said anything about it, because I would love to come
out. You just move to Canada and do that, because then you've got the law on your side. I've always had this imagined sort of, scenario of I'm like in a debate or something, and the first thing I do is announce that I'm a woman and legally go through how that means I am legally 100% as much of a woman as every single person in this room, and that I'm legally 100% as transgender as every trans person in this room. And that every time you're mentioning how vulnerable or how whatever trans people are, you're talking about
you're talking about this guy. Yeah.
And then this is the part where I would say, if you dare to challenge me, please tell me where you work. And then I would whip out my phone and call their HR department on the spot.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or
exactly.
I do want to say at this point though, I am actually enjoying Kathleen's book.
Oh no, I'm sure it's great.
Wonderful. Yeah.
It's gonna be great. She's just got this suddenly deciding to throw me under the bus because of Grace Lavery of all people. This porn sick dwarf of a
Don't get the dwarfs into it, Graham.
Sorry, but there's two people in this fight who look exactly like Feyman, to me, and Grace Lavery is one of them. And I just, the fact that Grace does a course on sissy porn and stuff like that, or involves it in his or her course, it's like, why the hell are you trying to impress this person who will always hate you? It just boggles my mind. And it's this idea that the other side is going to observe a kind of decorum. No, they're not. They're going to try and drive you out of your job. They're going to harass you until you're, until you're cross-eyed, and throwing other people under the bus to placate them. It's not going to work, apart from anything else. It's unethical, but it's also not going to work, So I just find it extraordinary that people don't realize the nature of this activism. I forgot to turn off the comments on a video I made you know, a kind of a little Loom video, and it just immediately filled up. I've saved the archive of the comments because it just immediately filled up with the most disgusting, you know, abuse. I've been getting that for like, you know, ever since I started talking about this stuff. So I just don't quite get what fight they are involved in. They know that these.
Of course, but you must do because, you know, otherwise, I mean, you have to sometimes, don't you? You have to sort of keep it closer to your chest, because otherwise you're also going to be cancelled. And they've obviously weighed up what they're prepared to say and what they want to say and how they want to say it. And they've weighed up being able to speak what they are able to and not be cancelled. I mean, that's it.
But the thing is, for some reason,
I don't think you can blame them for it, to be honest.
But they've positioned. It's absolutely. But the thing is, don't fuck over other people just to make yourself look good by comparison. It's really unethical, you know. And I'm surprised that Kathleen doesn't realize that, and Helen Lewis doesn't realize that. I always thought they were ethical people, but you live and learn. Listen, we've got Andy here. Yes, got Andy here. So let's bring him in and get this part of the show going. Hello, Andy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I've just been bashing my microphone a little bit.
It sounds crystal clear.
Good.
So I wouldn't worry about that. Andy, I will be pointing people to your wonderful interview with Julian Vigo on Savage Minds, which is really fascinating about your work with fighting Steiner schools and homeopathy and all this sort of thing. It's just fascinating. But obviously our interest is in gender ideology. And I guess we can start by asking, like, the Skeptics movement. I know Maria McLachlan and her husband, Alan Hennis, and they say they lost a lot of friends in the Skeptics movement, because the Skeptics movement, just like every other movement in the UK, has been ideologically captured. How do smart people fall for something like gender identity?
Oh, good grief! That's a very good question. I mean, first of all, it's worth saying, best of all, that the skeptic movement has fragmented, not just been completely captured. There are certain groups of people who have been captured, and it's not universal by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know, Alan is a very good friend of mine. We've been working together on various things for a decade or more, and there are a lot of other people like Alan and Maria, of course, who have been able to step back from this and see what's going on. But there are some people who haven't, which is something I still struggle with every day, really, and really try and understand what it is that is different between me and, say, some of the people who run some of the skeptics in the pubs that you know, will not tolerate any discussion of this. What's the difference between us? And that is a fascinating question. I don't know all the answers. Okay, if at any point I stop saying I don't know, you can just stop being a skeptic anymore. Okay,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the entire skeptic movement is all about trying to get through to people who have the sort of misguided beliefs. So you're trying all the time to get, I imagine, to understand their mindset and to understand what's going on in their minds so that you can better get through to them. Or at least I would imagine that's what good skeptics activism would do. You know, trying to reach homeopaths by understanding what appeals to homeopaths, that kind of thing. So do you apply that to some of these people who purportedly are, you know, skeptical, but have been sucked into this? I mean, what's your sort of, I mean, speculate a little, maybe. What's going on in their brains?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, having these sort of discussions, absolutely, you have to have a model of people's minds, obviously, because what you're trying to do is, you know, help them understand their thinking and where it might be going wrong and so on, of course, and your own thinking, where that might be going wrong. And, you know, talking with homeopaths, for example, very often when you're having that discussion, it's not the homeopaths really your target there. It's the people who might end up going to them, where you're really having that conversation there. They're the third party in the room always. Because I think the best description I've had this is that people get stuck in intellectual black holes. Okay, it's who was it? It was was it Stephen Law, the philosopher, came up with this phrase, intellectual black holes, where you get beyond the event horizon of the ability to critically appraise your own thought processes.
Mm.
And what happens is you go in, of course, there becomes like a protective event horizon around you that prevents you anymore from thinking critically about those core beliefs. And it's how cults work, of course. They prevent you from having the sorts of thoughts that allow you to escape.
Yes,
it's very clear what's going on inside this movement as well. There are very clear ways that punish people for having certain types of thoughts.
Yes. But at the same time, I think the high cost of not having the right thoughts, there's also the kind of, it doesn't seem like I'm always surprised by people who jump in with both feet, you know, who do think that those people who did kind of turn away from Maria and Alan and so on, you know, I that's the bit that I find hard to there's a funny story. I always bring this up. Apologies if you've heard it, but apparently con men used to love going to New York because New Yorkers thought they were smarter than everyone else. Yeah. So New York was like their favorite town to pull cons in. And I feel like gender identity is a similar thing. It's almost like they think there's something almost, I don't know, futuristic or something about.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? I mean, Richard Feyman, you know, is a big inspiration to a lot of skeptics, and he said the first rule is you must not fool yourself.
Yes.
If you think you are clever, then you're doomed. Okay, that's the way you're going to fool yourself. And yeah, New York. I've been conned in New York. Buying my first iPod, but there we go.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, and also here's another interesting thing about the skeptics movement. The only skeptics event I went to, I met a witch, and I met someone who believed that and I'm not saying anything against witches. They're again part of my core demographic at the moment. But there was also the only person I've ever met who didn't believe that 9/11 was terrorists and so on. He actually believed it was an inside job.
He was at the Skeptics conference, yeah?
Yes. So I wonder, is there also something about skepticism that attracts people who want to believe in things like conspiracy theories and so on, where the skepticism almost they become too skeptical? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's skepticism and pseudo-skepticism, and demarking the two is incredibly difficult, of course, and I think that's an important thing for the skeptical movement to recognize. It's got to be fundamentally a broad church, otherwise you're going to draw that line in the wrong place, okay? And I think that's what's going on now. They've tried to draw a line between skepticism and pseudo-skepticism and drawn it in the wrong place. So the trick is to avoid drawing it as much as possible, and then you're going to let in the cranks as well. But that's the price you pay for being open-minded, okay? It's a price you pay. You've got to let those people come along, and you've got to listen to them, and you've got to have arguments with them. Otherwise, you are going to draw a line in a dreadful place and get something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
So they annoyed me too, but you have to think,
but hasn't this happened in the skeptics movement? Didn't this sort of gender ideology come along, and then wasn't it argued out and people put their points forward, and then the rational sort of thinking prevailed? It doesn't seem as if that did actually happen.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that, Helen. Let me just try and turn it up a little bit. Say again.
Have you got YouTube on in the background? I can hear some feedback. No. Okay.
Well, cool. Yeah.
So I was just saying, didn't that happen in the skeptic movement when people who actually, when the gender ideology idea came along, wasn't it fought out? Didn't people have arguments about it and then come up with?
No. I think the only formal time that this was ever discussed was once at Skeptics in the pub when Boodaloops, I've forgotten her real name now.
Rebecca.
Yeah, she came along and gave a talk there, because I know there's one or two people at Leicester who are very switched on to this. Okay, one or two of them have spoken out about this, but in general, that was, but nothing else. Okay, so when I came to it, I was really naive. I just bumbled into it, and it was reading the judgment from the Child J case. I don't know if you remember that, where this is going back a few years now, where there was a court case about who was going to look after a child who was 7 years old. Okay, and the mum believed the child was transgender, and the dad was all a bit, whoa, what the hell's going on here? Okay, so there was a big custody battle. Okay, and it was quite clear the mum, well, what can I say? She had some issues. She had a person.
It seemed quite Munchausen, didn't it?
Yeah. And it invented this since the child was very young, 2 or 3 or whatever. And this is the first time I came across Mermaids as well, because they had been advising the mother as well. And I happened to tweet, there's something really odd going on here. And then boom, everything went bang and crazy, you know. One of my friends started apologizing to her friend on Facebook to being exposed to such horrible transphobic views. And I thought, what the bloody hell is going on here? You know? All I said
about what you had said.
Yeah,
somebody
all I said
was apologizing about
charity. Yeah, something very innocuous like that.
Yeah.
And suddenly it was like I'd been at your conference that you went to, Graham, and had a poo on the stage. You know, it was. Yeah.
I mean, have you ever seen anything like it? I've asked this of a few different people, and you were a very good person, I think, to ask. I've never seen anything like this.
No.
I'm in my early 50s. It just seems like a completely unprecedented event certainly in the West. There's a few comparisons, of course. You can look at things like McCarthyism, and things like the what were those trends in the satanic panic, multiple personalities disorder, all that sort of stuff. But I've never seen it all come together in such a strange way, and I've never seen it affect such intelligent people.
Yeah, there were warnings, though, weren't there, Graham? There were warnings that from America, I think, and the way their skeptic movement fragmented. And I hadn't really been paying much attention to that because it's America, and I don't understand what goes on in America. Yeah, it's a foreign country to me, and their politics are very different, and the form of skepticism is very different as well. They're focused on very different things. Obviously, religion is a far more powerful force there than on this side of the Atlantic. And so I just, I sort of paid attention, the Gamergate and Elevatorgate sort of stuff, and was struggling to really get what was going on. But it was a warning of ideological schisms that were going to happen, and this is one where it's happened in the UK. And the complete abandoning of sort of the principles of, the first thing that skeptics do is listen to arguments and challenge. Okay, and that's where it's the complete breakdown of these fundamental liberal skeptical approaches, I think, that have been shocking to me.
Yeah, it really is.
And all of us, to be honest, it has been the most shocking thing that I've witnessed.
Here's another aspect that. Oh, sorry, Helen.
No, I'm just illiberalism in the name of liberalism, and violence and exclusion in the name of inclusion. It's been incredible. Yeah,
I think once you get a phrase like trans women are women, which is a contradiction in terms. You can everything. If that's to be true, then you're going to see many more inversions. For instance, my favorite example, Billy Bragg criticizing George Orwell for saying that for his quote where he said, something like, if people don't want to hear something, then that probably means you're telling the truth, or something like that. I can't remember. But Billy Bragg criticizing George Orwell. Of course, it's these kind of reversals, these kind of strange inversions that I keep seeing all the time now, and it's only possible if you begin with a statement that's so untrue.
Just incredible, Billy. Yes, I've been. I live in Somerset, and I've been going to Glastonbury since I was about that high. Well, and every year I see Billy and cheer him on and so on, and then all of a sudden he's, "What are you talking about, Billy? What are you talking about?" I think a lot of it is we don't question our own assumptions. Things like free speech as well is another amazing one, really. And again, I think it's a big American-British divide in what we really mean by free speech, whereas You know, in America, they've got a formal definition. You know, the First Amendment and all of that. I'm not an expert, but so free speech is framed in terms of this constitutional framework, which is basically about the relationship between the state and the individual. And so free speech is all about the relationship between the state and the individual, and that's really knocked off course, I think, an understanding of the broader issues of free speech, which is one about society more than just the state, okay, and how society itself has a responsibility, each of us individually, to protect free speech. And so this is the whole thing about cancel culture as well. You know, people are saying, "Oh, it doesn't exist. You know, the state isn't getting involved. No one's really being cancelled." It's much more insidious than that, of course, as we well know. It's a very insidious thing. And again, the skeptic movement, I found incredible that they don't understand this. People will swear blind that this is not true and not happening, and yet you just have to scrape the surface, and they say it was just consequences. It's just consequences, and you think, well, exactly. You know, again, we have a responsibility to hear people, and we also have a responsibility to listen to people as well, regardless. Otherwise, we do not live in a free speech society. We live in a loud speech society.
No, I think that's absolutely right. That that XK CD cartoon, which, you know, when it first came out, I thought, yeah, you know, and he probably do it in reaction to something that was probably reasonable. The one that says, you know, oh, it's quite obnoxious now. I hate it, and it gets posted all the time. Where he's, you know, we just, you're not being, your free speech isn't being taken away. It's simply that we are not prepared to listen to your bullshit. And the idiocy of people sort of continuing to post this and saying, and you know, like you were saying, Andy, I've said the same thing before. If the government isn't doing it, then everything's okay. You know, nobody's cancelling you because the First Amendment still exists. As if there isn't any other way of silencing and cancelling and preventing people from speaking. It's nonsense, and it's wrong. And I think it's purposefully wrong, isn't it? Because it's just the easy way to shut people up, I think.
It's this idea that free speech can be cost-free, I think. There are awful views out there in society. People say awful things, as we well know, okay? But hearing those is the price we pay for liberal democracy, okay? I think it's as simple as that. We have to pay a price for these things, okay? Our freedoms don't come cost-free. And having people around us who we think are awful is that price we pay.
And of course, you, again, because it is a free society, you can listen to them, and then you can choose no longer to listen to them. You can say, I've heard what you've had to say, and I would actually agree with you, but you don't have to listen. But which is very, very different from saying you cannot. Nobody is allowed to listen. Those two things are very different, I think.
Yeah, but I talked about this a bit on a podcast about how some people, this idea on the left that some views should not be heard at all because they're dangerous and they're harmful. And that's an interesting idea, because I think we should really look into that and try to understand why some people on the left believe that. And I think in some contexts in the past, in very limited conditions, there was truth to that. Like, gays and lesbians were dying. Not just of HIV, but of inability to get jobs or housing, because they were kicked out of their houses. And people, if you are outed as homosexual, nobody wants to employ you. Nobody wants to give you housing, and you just fall out of society, and you end up in drugs and death very, very quickly. So this idea that homosexuals are bad or wrong and putting moral instead of, you know, on entire groups of people, that was a viewpoint that crossed the line of, like, merited some degree of control. You know, there are other arguments too that have been argued so much that if people still try to argue them, they're just, is there a name for that? Is that what sea lining is? I forget. But anyways, yeah, like, you know, tobacco companies, we just repeat the same arguments over and over again, even though they have been debunked. So at some point you could say that doesn't deserve to be heard anymore because it's not a good faith argument. It's, you know, but these are very rare circumstances. And this idea that viewpoints are harmful have to be looked at very, very specifically. And there has to be broad consensus that there's hard evidence that a viewpoint needs to be stifled in some way. But instead, the left has just decided, because everything's on a purity spiral, that we're more virtuous by taking more and more innocuous speech and declaring it deadly. Yeah.
But so, yeah, it is a difficult dilemma, and absolutely, safe speech is, I think, the dominant view here that's driving this. The problem is, of course, how do you tackle that dangerous speech? And it's by people having good answers to it, I think, really. What is your response? And you don't get good answers to things unless you hear the argument in the first place. So that's a difficult one. In all these things, I don't form my opinions until I've had that argument several times and I've really got it. So in the gender thing, I took 6 months really thinking about this and listening and rehearsing a few arguments before I waded in, so that I'd understood the issues. And I only came to the conclusions I did by hearing all these awful transphobic bigots going on about stuff. Okay, and that allowed me to understand what the issues were. Okay. The other thing is, who's going to draw the line about what is dangerous?
We're quite.
Do it. Who's in
charge?
Yeah,
but that's the thing that I think is something we need to talk about a little bit. Andy, I think that the feedback might be coming from your computer. If you could turn down the volume a tiny bit.
Oh yeah. Okay, good.
We'll make sure to speak up. But as we know, the conversation has been kind of deliberately ring-fenced, and so that only people who believe that trans women are women can engage in it. People who don't believe that, there's so many different thought-terminating cliches that shut them down. But of course, the most one of the key ones, which luckily I think we've all had a hand in destroying, is no debate. You know? I mean, I think that's the most revealing one in a way, because they really do not want their ideas interrogated.
We can see that with the government's announcements yesterday about the public inquiry into trying to ban conversion therapy. Okay.
Yes.
And the howling was very much about the idea that there was going to be a conversation about it. And we can see this straight out of, the Denton's playbook that was produced a few years ago for a lot of this. In order to change legislation, you have to do it quickly, you have to do it quietly, and on the back of something else.
Yes.
So they've been rumbled again, okay, that the Denton's plays have been stopped because there's going to be a period of discussion. And who really can be against that? I mean,
I know it's
conversion therapy is.
I can answer that. Stonewall are against that.
It's a fraught issue, absolutely, and of course it does involve a clash of rights. Okay, and we've got to recognise that. No matter how much we hate it, religious people, do they have the right to pray for a gay person? Okay, are we going to be a society that says they cannot do that? Maybe we are going to be a society that says that, but we've got to have that conversation. Okay, and the same goes for can you be a psychiatrist who wants to discuss with a 13-year-old girl how she feels about being a 13-year-old girl and maybe gay as well? Okay, is that going to be an allowed thing for a psychiatrist to do? And at the moment, what the activists want to say is, no, that psychiatrist cannot have that conversation, which is quite incredible.
It's very, very, very frightening.
I think it's meeting more and more resistance, though.
And I think this is what you were saying earlier, wasn't it, Graham? If this conversation is had, one would really hope that sense will prevail. I don't think everything has been captured to the extent that we see, because the institutions and the things that we have seen that have been captured are the ones that are shouting loudest on social media, because we have seen when these things go to court, etc., and are challenged, sense is prevailing a lot more than in the companies or like people like Stonewall, who are just doing all of the shouting. So one would hope that when all the evidence has been heard and all the different groups put forward their cases, the sense will prevail on therapists actually being able to do therapy.
Yeah, and also there's some real heavy hitters in the world of therapy who are fighting it now, and I think their numbers are going to increase. The other thing I'm hearing in a purely this is just anecdotal evidence, but it still cheers me up, is that I've heard some schools and places like that have been inviting more gender critical people to speak to them, to give the other side of the story. So I think people are beginning, especially since the LGBT Alliance being given the okay by the Charity Commission might have helped that as well. I think people are beginning to realize, oh, there is a debate, there is something to be spoken about, you know, and it's I don't know. So how do we make it? Here's a question: how, this may not be in your wheelhouse, Andy, but how do we make it safer for people to speak about it?
Do you know, right from the start, I thought the only answer is for people speaking about it. Okay, one of the great disappointments, I think, is that there are people who could speak about it that don't. Okay.
Yes.
So within the skeptic movement, I think of the totality of all the people I knew, you can divide them up into different sorts of people and where they fall. So there's people like Alan and Maria, of course, okay, and a large number of other people as well who are speaking up about it. Then there are people who know there's something wrong but keep quiet, okay, and there are probably many very good reasons for that, but also probably some bad reasons. I hated being as a skeptic, people telling me you have to talk about this issue, okay, because that's done for a number of reasons. One of them is to stop me talking about another issue, usually, okay.
Right.
Right. You know, there's no ranked list of important issues in the world that I have to talk about as a skeptic or anything. Okay, this is important to me. Steiner schools was, you know, fairly minor, but it was interesting and I thought important for a certain group of people, so I talked about it. Yeah, even though they tried to tell me not to. So there are those people. So there are, you know, people criticize prominent skeptics that don't talk about it. And when I look at what they're doing now, and actually they're doing pretty important things. Okay, and I won't name names. I'm sure you can work out who. And I'm saying, do they really want to wade on this? I did, because I personally came to the conclusion that I was willing to burn my skeptic capital on this. Okay, because you know, I couldn't think of a more fundamental and important issue where these postmodernist style ideas that got me into it in the first place were now creeping out of dark corners of sociology and the humanities and are now embedding themselves in biology and so on. And I found that incredible, okay, and frightening. So I thought, you know, the very nature of sex, it cannot be discussed. And I thought that's something we've got to talk about. So I did that. But then there are the other people who buy it. Why do they buy it? Why are they hook, line and sinker bought into this? And I think, and I've come to the conclusion that the key belief that they have, okay, is, and I'm sure this is nothing new, but the key belief they have is that gender identity is something like sexuality, okay? It is a fundamentally, deeply ingrained, maybe even innate aspect of our being, our personality, and how we relate to the world, okay? You know, absolutely then. So trying to convert that through conversion therapy would be wrong, okay? And the reason gay conversion therapy is bad is because it doesn't work primarily and hurts people, okay? You know, there's nothing wrong with being gay, but the fact that it doesn't work causes immense stress, okay? It's another moral issue if it did work. I mean, what would even that mean? But that's another question.
That's an interesting
but for gender identity, quite clearly, people, you know, even the proponents of gender identity will say it's a fluid concept. You know, so what's the
well? Look, here's someone in the comments who thinks that sex is immutable is a religious belief. Yeah. You know,
yeah, that's why I put into this subject for crazy ideas like that. Absolutely, thanks for that. Yeah, it's and I've seen skeptics, you know, argue that as well. I
know, and it's like the fact, you know, I don't know whether you saw, but the other day I posted what's her name? Sasha White's interviewed a whistleblower, and who says that gender ideology is causing havoc in medical schools, you know, and even the way they talk about their patients has become so convoluted. Yeah, you know, like they say things like the patient who was assigned female by her parents, stuff like that, you know. And it's really frightening because eventually it's going to start it's going to be so confusing. It's just adding a really frightening extra layer of confusion to something that we need to be as clear as possible, you know? It's very frightening. Well, listen, Andy, that was brilliant. I'm going to have to pick up my son, so I'm going to have to go. But I wanted to thank you that I'm not picking up either of my kids from a Steiner school, because we took a tour of one before we knew what they were like. And oh, thank God I looked up what you were telling us about them. Again, I really recommend Julian's interview with Andy on Savage Minds. It's very good and much more in depth than we've been tonight. But Andy, I hope you'll come on again. Sorry.
Nice to meet you all as well. You know.
Oh yes, and it's lovely. Yeah, really lovely.
Real pleasure. I love your tweets, and I loved them when I was still officially on Twitter.
Yes, me too.
Keep up the good work, and we'll see you again soon. Yeah. Cheers, Andy.
Okay, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I just wanted to say before we went that the link that we're going to provide, that has the link to the crime ipso thing, that is a kind of sister publication to my blog called The War on Women. And the idea behind it is that it shows a problem, but it also gives you something you can do to sort it out. So I don't push it enough. I don't edit it or anything like that. It's all completely female run. So I just ask that if people could follow that and subscribe to it. It's also free. So you know, it's a good resource, I think, and I really wanted to have more people subscribing to it. Sorry, I ranted on a little bit there. What is there to look forward to this week? Is there anything coming up that we need to keep our eyes open for? No,
I'm sure plenty of things will turn up that we can either laugh at or be upset about.
There was a very cheering thing that Private Eye covered Woman's Hour, not interviewing Maya Forstater and choosing instead to run a piece about sharing bath water with your family.
Yes.
It was very, very funny.
That was very, very good. Very funny, yes.
I'm glad Women's Hour got exposed to a wider audience over that. Sorry, my stomach is still killing. I think this has been a bit of a blur one because of me, partly. But we will hopefully all be not sick next week, and we'll continue making ourselves ill by thinking about this stuff. Thanks again to Andy. Thank you, Helen.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Artie. Might see you later on in the week, but if not, see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Oh no, I've covered up the thing that makes me say goodbye. Oh no, there we go. End.